Well, welcome. My name is Ruth Nicholson, and on behalf of Team Genius, I want to welcome you to the next hour of discussion about issues in youth sports. I'm one of the trainers and coaches here at Team Genius, helping people with assessments of players and coaches and referees and other things that you can assess with Team Genius. The other half of my world is spent with the GO program, which helps clubs with leadership, operations, governance, boards of directors, and operating better as organizations. With me today is Gabe Skelly. He's the customer success manager at Team Genius. He really spends his time talking to sports folks across the US and Canada and overseas, and really has not only helping them be successful in what they do, but also picking up lots of what's going on, what people are doing to be creative in the space right now. So I'm really glad he's here. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't learn something from Gabe. So what we're going to do is, this is all about you for the next hour. So wherever you're from, whatever sport is your passion, we're really glad you're here with us. Last week, folks wanted to talk about some specific kinds of topics. And during the week, people sent in their questions. What's on your mind? What do you want to talk about? And they sort of come down to 4 things. And that's kind of how we're going to dance through this hour. The first has to do with registration in spring and summer seasons. What's that beginning to look like for you? Second, facility rentals. Some of you are looking at needing to rent fields, to rent gym space, and some of it's short-term and some of it's stretching into the fall and winter, and how do you handle that? Lots of questions about finances. Some of the hanging topics from last week had to do with the CARES Act here in the United States, as well as fundraising and how to manage some of those issues that you're dealing with right now. And lastly, I call it getting back to your game, whether it's getting back on the field, back in the gym, and some of the issues around what's it going to take so we can actually go play again. So with that, feel free to show your face, open up your audio, join us talking. If you have lots of extra things going on at home, kids, pets, housemates, maybe it's a little noisy, feel free to use the chat and we'll keep a track of that and your questions and what you want to contribute there. And yes, there will be a recording of this that you will get after we finish. The first topic has to do about our spring and summer seasons even happening for you. For some of you, they've been canceled. For some of you, they're still on hold. But how are clubs handling tryouts and trying to predict enrollment for the summer, enrollment for the fall, and farther out? Before I throw it to the group, Gabe, what are you hearing about how are people handling registration and predicting enrollment and tryouts right now?
Yeah, so kind of any combination of things. I've seen a lot of clubs that are really gearing up to just jump as fast as they can. Everywhere from groups in Minnesota that are, maybe there's some private businesses that run, elite training centers that are planning on opening up as soon as humanly possible, with some changes maybe with COVID-19, rules on safety. Clubs all over the U.S. that are planning, different areas depending upon where they're located, if they're open or going to be opening. Getting ready for things to open up right away and taking registrations all over Canada as well. I'm seeing, things that are, a lot of people are planning things just to be pushed off, but pretty much the season's still happening as usual as can be, with them having a late start. More fall and summer seasons happening than those spring seasons, but a lot of places are still, registering their kids, saying that if you've been with the club in the past, you're guaranteed a spot. Maybe to put kids on those teams, they're using a combination of their evaluations they had last year, or some coach evals, or even doing some remote training. They're having the kids self-report on, what they're doing now, but still seeing a lot of positivity and people just trying to figure out, what they're going to do, and as soon as this stuff opens up, so they're ready.
So how are some of the rest of you handling predicting your enrollment and managing registration? I've got something from Carol in the chat. Do you want me to read the chat, or do you want to jump in, Carol?
Go ahead and read it. That's fine.
Okay. Carol's in British Columbia in Canada, and their provincial health officer has just started to suggest that some sports may be able to operate in training settings, likely small groups, and in sports that have limited contact and don't share sports. Competition is unlikely for a year, so they're not overly optimistic that they'll be able to operate their volleyball camps because that's an indoor sport.
Sorry, that should have said share equipment.
Oh, share
sport.
equipment. Right. Sharing equipment, sharing tight spaces. Those are two things that are tough to overcome right now. What are others hearing? All right. The sort of the corollary question had to do with facility rentals. We got a couple of questions about facility rentals. In Minnesota, you actually have to rent indoor facilities to play sports in the winter, regardless of what sport you're, well, I guess you could play hockey outdoors. But the question was how to deal with renting domes in the winter for sports that can't be played outside, and costs for rental space. The other part of the question was they're being asked, at least this party in Minnesota, to sign a contract that goes through November, December, and on into next year. For those of you who have to have contracts to rent space, what are you seeing in the permitting and rental space issues? What are you running into as you're trying to guess what kinds of facilities you'll need to rent? Anyone?
I can jump in a little bit. I know I've talked to a couple soccer customers in particular, where they have, if they have their own fields, they're, kind of more ready to go than if they have to rent facilities. But running into a little bit if the schools are closed for the spring, that they're having a little issue with still trying to rent, fields for specifically soccer or some of the outdoor sports if it's associated with the school district, because the schools are closed. So a little bit of an issue there, but definitely easier if it's a private, facility that's got maybe non-municipal ownership on what they're doing.
Yeah, I know a number of places where if you're renting school facilities, if the schools are closed, you can't rent the facility at all. Carol says we're looking at trying to find more facilities and gyms so they can have smaller groups in a single space, but they anticipate that their rental costs are going to go up by about 50%. Monique in California, she says they usually rent fields for baseball and usually only school fields, and right now none of them are available. Are you seeing any, for those of you who are actually talking to folks about field and facility rental, are you noticing any differences in terms, in requirements and protocols? Or are people still figuring that out? Okay. Odds are you may start to see those. I'm hearing noises about protocols. Carol, we're being told that the club will need to provide hand sanitizing stations. Others can't even discuss any of that because they're not sure when things will open up. Jennifer, being in hockey, we're going to need to be creative. We're waiting on guidance from our governing body, but in the interim, we're reaching out to our facilities, both city facilities and private, to check on what the variance in our rental agreements might be. And Rob says, we're hearing rumors about sanitation stations, temperature checks, and face masks for soccer practices and games.
I've talked to a couple of customers in the last couple of days where they talked about a lot of this kind of stuff. I actually get the sense from hockey that some people feel like it might not be too hard to do this in hockey as long as there aren't a lot of spectators. I mean, hockey is a sport. The big thing is going to be the changing rooms and sitting on benches and things. But I've heard ideas of kids coming, fully dressed, expanding on face guards, so shields, so that maybe droplets don't come out of them as much. Not maybe as big of issues in hockey as some of the sports where you've got a ball in hot weather, but some bigger organizations we're working with are planning to roll out soon this summer. Their issues, some around restrooms, of course, and there may be thinking about going to porta potties that are easier to sanitize in some ways, where you can just bleach down the whole thing than traditional restrooms. But then also having more sanitizing stations, maybe taking temperatures, then also staging kids. So if it's a tryout, if there are things where they can do individual tryouts and maybe a camp scenario or something, so that they're 6-7 feet apart, and just having that spacing, just like you'd see in a lot of grocery stores and things right now.
Yeah. So, in terms of looking ahead, Rob, they're looking to purchase hand sanitizer in bulk from a local whiskey distillery. And they just placed a bulk order of customized, washable, breathable, tri-ply face masks. So some investments already happening. I know, gosh, I think I've been on the phone for the last 3 days. Carol wants to know where to get those masks. Rob, can you type in the chat box if you've got a source? And we'll make sure we can put it in the follow-up email. I know I've seen local clubs here in Washington State starting to come out with protocols for how they're going to get back to training, back to games. There have been a number of articles. State of Idaho has came out this week with a new set of back to game protocols for youth sports. It's still fairly general, but they actually published those this week. I think moving from sort of the high level, we need to be 6 feet away from each other, and hand sanitizing, and sort of the obvious things are like the first layer. I think there's some other issues around how would you manage an entire field and police, make sure that people are in fact far enough apart, and those sorts of things. So Rob has put in his email for those who want to ask about masks. And Darlene has a suggestion as well. One of the other questions that came up that folks wanted to bring to this session had to do with finances, a lot of different pieces of that. So why don't we shift gears? Question from Monique. If we cannot play in a field and have games, what are other ways we can train or do something with our players and still be able to charge something for some sort of income coming in? Gabe, do you have some suggestions from folks you've been talking to about training and doing things with your players that you can still have some revenue source, even though getting in the gym, getting on the field isn't possible right now?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of them, I see, like Rob's saying here too, virtual training sessions. I've seen a lot of that kind of clubs going to more virtual training sessions, leveraging, YouTube or different places where they'll have a coach or multiple coaches go and do drills that they can do at home. You name the sport, I've seen it, just even body mechanics and being able to do plyometrics and stay in shape for your seasons. But clubs specifically using Team Genius, we've got some secure video options where they've got kids training at home. Maybe their parents are videoing some of the things they're doing different drills, and the coaches can actually watch those videos securely, and then again, in turn, give them video feedback on how they're doing. And some of the clubs are building that as, essentially remote training, almost like a personal trainer. It takes a lot more time, I would say, for the coaches, but if you've got paid staff and you're doing this stuff, then that's a whole different scenario than if you've got volunteer coaches. So different things there, but offering, a way to connect with the kids, maybe give the parents peace of mind that they're going to keep getting better and keep working out. And then, just making sure that they're still connected. We talked a lot last week about communication. I think, paid where you're charging for something or not. That communication is huge to keep communicating with your players and their parents, so you don't, either kids fall off their sport or decide to go to a different club that is communicating, or those kind of things. That communication is huge.
So both Rob and Richard indicated that they're doing virtual programming, virtual training. Carol's question is, do you have insurance issues with virtual training? Carol's sport governing body has indicated that their insurer needs to know about the virtual training you're doing. Rob says, New Jersey Youth Soccer has told us it's okay to do virtual training and they'll provide coverage as long as the activities are age and skill level appropriate, and we're not putting kids in a dangerous position with the activities. Fuad asks about a source of bulk hand sanitizer. If any of you, I know we have distilleries here in Washington State too that have changed their production to hand sanitizer, a different kind of alcohol. If you have a resource for him, feel free to put it in the chat to help him out. And Monique asks, what are you finding to be the best program to use for virtual training? What are the programs you're piecing together to make that happen? Rob, do you want to jump in? I know you've been doing a lot in that area. Oh, Justin, you can unmute yourself and talk. You don't have to just listen to us. Justin says, Beyond Pulse, which is a Portland, Oregon smart tech company, a heart rate monitor, their group has an active minutes campaign going. And so it's a challenge. How much activity can you do in a week? And there are prizes courtesy of Nike. And the Active Minutes campaign is something that's going on across the country. From Beyond Pulse. That's from Justin. Oh, you unmuted yourself.
I did. Hello, Ruth.
Did
Hello,
I get
everybody.
it wrong?
Oh, no, not at all. You covered it very eloquently as usual. So what it was, the group that I've been involved with is obviously that we're trying to strike a balance between not being able to work with organizations or more difficult with everybody being quarantined, and also the benefits of being active from both a physical and emotional perspective, and just trying to keep the kids connected who are quarantined between their teammates, and then bring some kind of regional competition, because we list not only the individual players, but we list the clubs with the most minutes. And it launched this week, and we'll have our first winners this coming Monday.
Oh, all right. Rob says that he's got a link for hand sanitizer for those of you that need it. He's using Zoom for our team Zoom sessions, which includes individual technical work. They also have their staff creating small videos and uploading them to YouTube, and then posting them on their site, as well as Instagram Live.
I'd like to piggyback on that for a second, Ruth. Something we talked about is, everybody on the call, what are you guys doing, this week that's working as far as, engaging with players? We see different things, but last week we had people talking about, Instagram things, what kind of drills you're doing. I've heard a lot of people talk about like kicking drills or different things. What platforms you're engaging on, that's directly with the players. So are you doing Facebook, Instagram, Twitter? Some people are talking about TikTok. Like, what are you guys doing this week that's working to engage with the players and the kids specifically?
Come on, we know there's stuff that's working.
Hey,
Okay,
I can.
No, go ahead, Rick.
We're using to engage the athletes. We're using any social means possible. So TikTok, Instagram. We do a lot of Zoom. Each coach is responsible for holding a weekly meeting with their players and stuff. And our technical director, and along with the coaches and stuff, we're putting out weekly challenges to our athletes and our technical training. We use Instagram Live, Facebook Live, YouTube, whatever resource we can get our hands on, and that includes borrowing and stealing from the internet. That's what we're using. Anything we can keep our kids engaged and touching a ball right now, that's what we're doing.
Thank you. Stephen, did you have something to add?
Yeah, we've tried a couple different things. To echo what Rick said, you try everything you can because these kids basically are on every technological platform you can think of. But we've had a lot of success in terms of not just with Zoom meetings or with, we've got a pretty extensive set of drills that we've sent out that we have a YouTube channel set up. But we've had a couple coaches that have actually started interactive training over Zoom, where we have a coach who's really good at running small group sessions, and he's had up to 10 to 15 kids all on a Zoom call, but they're not like this call where we're face to face. They're actually doing workouts, and he's working them through them and coaching them as they're working out. So he's got them, we're a volleyball club. So he's got them hitting into a rebound board, hitting targets with buckets, and different things like that, having them do dive and roll drills. So he's actually putting them through an hour-long physical workout, and he's watching them as they do it and coaching them as they go along. So it's a much more interactive and actual, almost, I mean, these kids come out of these sessions tired, and they've actually got live coaching as they do this. So it's been really neat to see that kind of unfurl over the last 2 weeks. So he's had probably 20 sessions with 10 to 15 kids each this week.
All right. Others are saying they're using Techni Football, Yale's product. Troy, are you seeing things from the Positive Coaching Alliance angle? What are you seeing these days?
Hey, thank you.
He didn't know I was going to ask him that.
No. I love the conversation because it's learning, and as we're discussing with different sports, different associations, it's interesting how what we're seeing is there's a definite, what are we doing for the physical part of it, skill, drill, development, and then what are we doing to stay connected? And sometimes those aren't the exact same things. I think those who have developed a YouTube, we're hearing that a lot, a YouTube channel, but also just as routine as sending out, here's what we want you to do for the week, film portions of it and send it back to the coach, and we can talk about it and keeping them active. So I think part of what it is we're hearing is associations trying to decide, are we trying to keep them active, or are we really trying to advance their skills? And sometimes it's both, but I think, that there can be, if it's keeping them active and keeping a ball on their foot or in their hand or in their mitt, that could be a little different approach than the high level skills and drills. But what we're hearing, to your question, Ruth, is it's kind of all over the place. It's just keeping them as active as possible. And sometimes what we're hearing is they'll send a drill and it might be a little complicated. And if mom and dads aren't able to decipher or correct something, it gets to be a little bit of a frustration for the kid. So maybe something to keep in mind at the level of you're sending out instructions. I do think the other part of it is to keep them connected with just activities and that they know you care, and like Positive Coaching Alliance, we have some free online courses that help them with their mental strategy and their being a good teammate. That's not necessarily foot or hand on the ball, but some of those attributes are good to focus on as well.
Let's start with, we've got a bit of a chat thing going on about refunds. Rob has said they've communicated to everyone earlier this week and said that you're planning on offering something, probably credits, but you can't make a final determination until we actually return to play and have a sense of what's actually happening in the season, what's happening with tournaments, what things have been paid for, and what this cash savings is for your organization. So it's a bit of a complicated equation. Carol says her season was canceled with 6 weeks remaining, including the provincial and national competitions. So they're working on refunding a portion of those fees related to unused facilities and canceled events. Are there other creative uses of refunds and credits that folks can share to help Manuel out?
It's Roland here from
Roland.
Fisher Minor Hockey. How are you?
Yeah. What are you all doing?
So what we're doing is we only had a couple weeks remaining in our season for our core house league program, which is 80% of our kids. Rep teams, some were done, some could have continued for about 4 to 6 weeks, depending on their skill level. So we've said no refunds, but we are looking at a rebate for next year. And it's not predicated on how much time an individual had left. What we're going to do is understand the economic impact of COVID-19 to our organization and to our family members that are playing. And what we're going to do is offer that rebate across the board equally to everybody, and just say, you know, we want to make our sport affordable. We want to make our sport accessible. And then we're looking for funding partners to match. So we had a bit of a war chest. As I had said last time I was on, we had managed to have reserves. So we're going to dip into our reserves. We came out due to cancellation of facility agreements that we were released from our obligations on with a fairly decent profit at the end of this year that we're going to take that. So I think we're probably going to take about $150,000, $200,000 is my guess right now, turn that into a rebate across anybody who registers next year, and be able to bring the cost of the sport down significantly, thereby trying to encourage people to not stay away due to economic hardship, but return to play, stay physically active, stay healthy, and see what we can do. But again, that all hinges on whether we're allowed to return to play.
So a question to the group from Manuel. Do your members generally understand that there are sunk costs we can't get back that we paid on their behalf? Things like fields and tournaments and stuff. How are you communicating the fact that not all the money, some of the money's already been spent? Carol says, we've had to communicate clearly what those sunk costs include. Some families were thinking they would get more back, but by being as transparent as possible, they now understand. Rob says 99% of his membership have been supportive. The real test will come when we actually convey an amount that we are crediting or refunding, and whether they understand why it's that amount. Transparency is key. And I can say that's what we're hearing in our conversations with lots of folks. One of the things that came up, well, two things that came up from last week that folks wanted to bring into this week. One was the CARES Act here in the States. And I think Gabe and Ben have a poll to see how many of you were able to interact with that. Can you all launch that poll? Yep. Yeah, let's do that. And while we're doing that, I'm going to pick on Todd Larson. Todd is one of the founders of Team Genius, and his latest act of genius was actually getting some of the PPP money and assistance for the company. So Todd, can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like so people get some hope that in fact, sometimes you can be successful?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ruth. So yes, we were one of the fortunate companies to be able to participate and actually get the funds that we needed. And, you know, it really is a good program for many types of organizations. You know, to provide that, that money to keep your staff on payroll, and so that you can come out the other side strong as business picks up it's a really good design program. So so we went about it as a couple of different ways. We do all of our banking through Wells Fargo, but Wells Fargo looked like at the beginning they were starting to drag their feet in terms of when they would be open to start taking applications. And so we had a connection with one of our board members through a local community bank here in Minnesota. And from what we understand, the Small Business Association tends to do a lot of business through small banks, regional banks, community banks, et cetera, and tend to prioritize those organizations more. So by making that connection, we got our application in as fast as we could, and were able to secure the funds within a week. So this was an organization, this was a bank that we didn't have any relationship with prior, but were willing to take us on. And we were very grateful for that. So I think my biggest suggestion would be, if you're looking to participate in the program and you're waiting on the big banks, start doing the work to look elsewhere. Start connecting with, or there's other parts through like payroll providers and things like that, where they're providing links to smaller banks that have had success with it and making it the offer to make that connection for you.
Yeah. Rob says they tried to apply, but because their trainers are all 1099 employees, they're contractors, they're not W-2 employees, they weren't permitted to submit an application, which we left off as an option on the poll. Oh my gosh.
Interesting, because our understanding of it was you can include 1099 contractors as part of the loan amount of the funds that you can get up front, but they would not count toward the forgiveness part of it. So knowing that, you can make a decision whether to go with the PPP loan or some of the other routes, which included the EIDL loans, the economic impact disaster loans that were also being offered. Those were a little bit different program where you needed to put up some personal guarantees and things like that, but it is another option out there.
Yeah, looks like Monique had a similar experience to Rob. Gabe, how'd the poll turn out?
Pretty equal across the board. So mixed people that are, applied or didn't apply, or it wasn't an option where they were. So kind of a equal split. So again, there's a lot of kind of mixed things that people are doing right now with the finance parts.
Right. So the other thing that came over from last week was people said they wanted to talk about fundraising. So if you've got you're wrestling with refunds and credits and registration and maybe help from the government or maybe not, fundraising is another revenue source. And we'll start with Gabe. Did you pick up some interesting stuff happening in Minnesota in terms of fundraising and nonprofits right now?
Yeah, so Minnesota, there's an organization that we work with nationally, and usually this happens in the fall, but they launched GiveMN is the site. They're doing it's Give at Home Minnesota is the hashtag, and they're essentially doing a 7-day fundraiser for any nonprofit where they've got matching grants from the Bush Foundation, a bunch of other large companies. So any group that gets even a $5 donation for a nonprofit in Minnesota through this site gets the chance every hour to get a $250 addition to any money that gets put in. So that's pretty awesome. I've done a lot of giving personally through GiveMN in the past, and they usually do it in November. They expedited it because of this to starting today, May 1st. And then that's piggybacking on this Giving Tuesday in the U.S., where it's a thing that's happened more frequently in the fall, and they've actually moved that to next Tuesday. So nationally in the U.S., there's going to be a big push to the Giving Tuesday campaign, with a lot of big companies and other groups matching donations and adding in extra kickers for people that are nonprofits to get donations coming in. So things to check out nationally and locally for these giving campaigns right now. And if you're not in an area where that's happening, Google search will find a lot of those things where I can share some details on it. So pretty cool that as far as if you are a certified nonprofit, there are a lot of options happening right now where people are trying to help out and really fun. I mean, I think so far in Minnesota in like one day, and again, this is just in Minnesota, but there's been over $500,000 donated since like 8 o'clock this morning. So there's definitely people, giving back to nonprofits to try to help things keep running.
One of the other things that clubs out here have done, and you can do that anywhere, Amazon is known for being an online place you can order all sorts of things. And for those of us who are stuck in the house, I'm on day 62, I think. But Amazon has a program called Amazon Smile, for those of you who don't know about it, where you can designate a nonprofit of your choice that gets a percentage of whatever it is you happen to buy on Amazon. So if you are a nonprofit and you can get recognized as a part of that Amazon Smile program, your members, for whatever it happens to be, is it books or electronics or whatever it is they get off of Amazon, a portion of that could come back to you. So you might want to check that out if that if that suits your needs. Roland, for giving campaigns, are you seeing trends towards food banks and the health sector as compared to the sports sector? Anyone seeing any trends? I don't have a good answer for him.
I mean, my personal view, I guess this is my view, and I've done a lot of, my wife's actually executive director of a nonprofit. I just throw that out there. So I would say a lot of things, fundraising campaigns are a lot about you, who you are, and who you reach out to. I mean, a lot of these campaigns are very much about the individual people that are making the asks or the organizations that are making the asks. So if you're out there and letting your parents know and the community organizations you interact with that, hey, you guys are having a tough time on top of everything else, and that you provide a very needed service to the community, which you definitely do, you know, helping kids keep going in sports, which is helping them stay sane through a lot of these things. I think just reaching out to the parents and all of the engaged people on boards that, you know, that's going to make the biggest difference. And that's where I see, you know, a lot of people, you know, maybe funds being directed towards one thing or the other. What I've seen as matching grants is a lot of them aren't specific to anything. I mean, the programs I've looked at, there's a lot of matching grants that it doesn't matter who you are, what kind of nonprofit you are, you can get those matching funds if you're, you know, getting donations through one of these, you know, some of the sites I've listed.
Carol says they are seeing that right now. Almost everything is focused on those who are impacted by COVID. If we're going to fundraise, it will be to help those who can no longer afford to participate, because people will give to that cause, but not to other things we might normally raise funds for. Are there other things you all are doing in the realm of sponsorships and fundraising to try to get multiple streams of revenue to get you through the tough times? Carol asks, Todd, she heard that the Small Business Administration was no longer accepting EIDL loans right now. Have you heard anything about them reopening or accepting new applications?
Yeah, I was just typing back. I have not heard that they were closed to that. So that was the first loan option that became available as things started closing down. After the PPP was opened up and we jumped into that one, we turned our eyes from the EIDL loans because that just wasn't going to work for us. So I haven't checked back with that program in a little while. So I guess I just don't know if anybody else has had any luck with the EIDL loans recently. You can jump in.
Anyone? Any experience with the loans? Jennifer says one opportunity they're looking into is how they can support our local businesses operated by members of their association. I know I was talking to a team, it was an adult amateur team in Southern California earlier this week, and they were trying to figure out if their adult athletes, because they play in an amateur league, could partner with local restaurants and do some sort of sharing of, if their athletes became delivery people for these restaurants, was there a way to help the restaurants continue to sell food and provide that service, and the delivery would be done by the athletes and they would share some of that revenue. They were trying to figure out how they could do that safely and effectively. Sam says, I'm with a company called FlipGive at flipgive.com, and it's focused on helping teams fundraise. Over 60,000 teams used it last year, raising over $4 million. They're hoping to help more teams this year. They're also creating resources for various grant programs and learning about other opportunities. Roland says his teams use FlipGive as well. Carol says her club has made a pretty big public show of support for our local hospitals, and that's given the club good exposure. We hope that that'll build some goodwill when we come back next year looking for support. They've also partnered with restaurants connected to their club families to provide meals to hospitals, which is a win-win. Other fundraising and community ideas. What else are you doing that's working? So the last chunk of questions that came in were focused on getting back in the game, getting back on the field, getting back in the gym. And what's that going to look like? What are those guidelines going to look like? And it's a pretty cloudy crystal ball right now. But I do, you know, there have been some articles, New York Times had one. Like I said, there's a local soccer club up here in Washington who just published their guidelines for what it's going to look like when their teams get back on the field. It's called the Pac Northwest Club out of Tukwila, Washington. State of Idaho has come out with a series of protocols for a variety of activities to support their opening up of the state. One of those is actually for youth sports. It's not sports specific, but it talks a lot about what the state is going to expect out of youth sports. There's an article in Soccer Today that dropped either last night or this morning. I saw it this morning, that Got Soccer has actually put together an app that is geared towards managing the spectators at your games and how to help you not only keep them distant from each other, but actually to manage the numbers of parents and spectators that come to a soccer match. And I'm trying to think, I've been on so many calls. A lot of folks are still struggling with, you know, what does it look like in terms of bathrooms and hand sanitizers, and then more into if you wear bibs or, you know, pennies, colored pennies, is that something that a team provides now and does the laundry periodically, or is it now have to be done between every practice, or do you migrate to bibs now become a part of the training uniform for your athletes and they have to bring their own and keep their own clean? Roland, I know Hockey Canada is working on their program changes through a community engagement process. They hope to have it out in consultation with public health. So what other things are happening in terms of trying to look forward to what are we going to have to do as teams, as associations, as field managers to actually get back in our game? Rob, read the pennies and the bibs. We're having the coaches wash after every practice for the fear that the kids and the parents won't actually wash them themselves.
So, Ruth, I think for each of us, depending on where we are regionally, our governments are going to also be establishing things. I know in Canada, the Ontario government has just started determining things and posting their expectations for each of the different sectors of our economy as they return to functioning. My guess will be details around sport will probably be one of the last places coming, which is unfortunate. What the answer I can't seem to find is, or from any of the governments, so if anybody has an inkling, because they'll start to follow each other once they drop something, will things be general, or are they going to make decisions predicated on the nature of your sport? As I said last time I was on, I'm not only involved with hockey, but I'm also president of our local rugby club. And I have some concerns around, you know, the nature and the intimate contact that rugby provides. You know, if you ever seen a rugby game and watched them scrum, your head is right beside that next guy's, and you're you know, breathing on people regularly just due to the nature of the game. Are governments looking at saying yes to some and no to others? Has anybody heard anything?
Are folks hearing things specific to sport? Richard?
We haven't heard anything. other than, some states are starting to loosen their guidelines. Here in Minnesota, we just got pushed another 2 weeks to the 18th, which coincides with U.S. Club Soccer's next date of when they're going to make a decision on when their governing clubs and stuff like that can return to play. One of the, as we start to develop our back to play protocols, one of the things that we're running into is, are the families and are the players comfortable getting back on the field? I'm lucky enough to be in an area where we have a lot of parents who are nurses and physicians at the Mayo Clinic and stuff. So I get a little more, guideline and guidance from them as far as, what protocols we should be taking and stuff. But a lot of parents have, addressed concerns about, how safe do they feel comfortable letting their players return to play.
So Carol says their public health office has suggested that soccer, hockey, and lacrosse could be the first to come back. She's not sure she understands lacrosse, but mostly because they don't share equipment. And I know we talked last week a little bit about the challenges of indoor sports, volleyball, basketball, hockey, as compared to outdoor sports, and that the outdoor sports might have an edge. Carol.
Ruth, that was field hockey, not indoor hockey.
Oh, field hockey, excuse me.
I've also heard that one of the advantages of having soccer, field hockey, and lacrosse come back, probably baseball as well, is that the virus doesn't do well in heat. So it doesn't live well in heat. So that's some of the stuff we're hearing from our physicians and stuff like that here. So I think that might, help in allowing those sports to come back because of, the climate that those sports would be playing in at that time. Right.
Hanifa from Bellingham says she doesn't remember if it was brought up here last week or at another conference call, but she's with the Boys and Girls Clubs in Northwest Washington. She says they're planning to survey their families to gather information on when and how they will be comfortable returning. That'll help them plan how to phase back in their programs. Yeah. Thank you, Hannah. I want to circle back around. There was a question that came up while we were sort of dancing through when are we going to be able to play again and what does that look like? But Monique needs some help from you all with a question. Back to your coaches, back to paying your coaches. What are the options or the best programs we should tell our coaches who are 1099 contractors? What should we tell them to look into since they can't pay them and they can't get money from the government to pay them because they're contractors? How are you helping your contract coaches? Help Monique out. 1099s can apply for the PPP themselves, is one thing.
I can speak on behalf of that if you would like.
Oh, yes, please do.
So this is specific to New Jersey and also specific to, let's phrase that again, specific to New Jersey and then based upon my experience with the federal stuff. So obviously, as most states will have, you don't qualify for unemployment insurance as previous, but now do. New Jersey is calling it a pandemic unemployment assistance. And it's taken them until this week to have a system that has been able to be set up to process claims. They said they began processing claims for the people in that status on Wednesday. Basically what happens is you file normally, you get rejected for that system, and then they put you into the next pot and they start assigning funds from that pot. You are, as an independent contractor, self-employed, you are allowed to apply for the EIDL if you made it in time. You can also apply for the PPP. What you cannot do is double dip. So if you qualify for your unemployment, you have to make sure that your periods of claim and your period of enacting the loan do not overlap. So that's kind of my experience that I've had personally, and also some fellow colleagues in the area.
Thank you. Carol Allen also says Massachusetts has funded a pandemic unemployment assistance, a PUA, as well. So I'm good. You got some ideas. So are there any other questions you have in the final couple of minutes that we're here together, or topics you want us to tackle next Friday for you? Topic for next week. Are people making changes to their waiver forms regarding people acknowledging that there is a risk? Ooh, I like that, Rob. Thank you. Other topics you want to make sure we touch on next week? You can always send them in to us during the week too. You don't have to think them all up to right now. But we have been known to invite folks who know stuff about those topics to maybe help us out.
Just on that last question, Ruth, I'd be interested to see if there's any proactive thought processes going on with the insurance company.
And insurance came up last week as well. And the folks I know in insurance are scrambling around types of insurance that don't yet exist, that people are starting to ask for. And I know of at least a couple of clubs who are renegotiating their permits and their lease agreements, and the insurance requirements are changing, and people are trying to figure out what that means and how you actually meet those requirements. So
we're getting a lot of that too.
Are you?
Yeah, we're getting a lot of when we use Sports Engine for our registration and stuff, and some people signed up for the registration insurance, and one of the questions they had is our registrations covered underneath this insurance and stuff. So after doing some research on it and then looking at what their COVID-19 response is for single events, they have different refund policies for single events and then for multiple events. But it looks like if tournaments are canceled and you're losing events and stuff like that, it is not going to be covered underneath that insurance waiver. So that's what I read from it. And I actually had to deal with this today, so.
Yeah. I know one of the folks who joined us last week was talking about being in negotiation with his, he uses a venue that has multiple fields, and that they were discussing what kind of insurance his club was now going to have to provide in order to rent those fields. And he was having trouble finding it. Todd?
Oh yeah, I was just going to jump in, and I was just thinking about the privately owned training facilities. I've got a good friend that owns one here in Minnesota, and it falls under the premises liability laws here in the state, where, you know, if you sign up to participate in a sport, there's a reasonable expectation that you might get injured while playing the sport. So if you sprain your ankle on the field during practice, you can't hold the facility liable. But if you walk outside and slip on an icy sidewalk and break your ankle, then the owner of the facility is liable. Where the viral infections come in, I'm not sure, without them specifically updating their own waivers to say, if you feel like you caught COVID-19 by participating in an activity here, that's a risk that you assume that you're going to take and that they're not liable.
I know who to invite. Although I don't know if he's going to say yes or not, but So with that, if you've got any last questions, we'd love for you to join us next week. Like I said, we're trying to give you a place where you can ask questions, pick each other's brains, maybe get some ideas of different ways of approaching the issues you're facing wherever you happen to be. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your ideas. And we hope to see you again next Friday.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you guys very much for organizing this. It's fantastic as usual.
Thank you. Glad to have you.